The cry for help. The jungle was dark and wild, its canopy thick with vines and strange creatures lurking in the shadows. The air was heavy and thick with the smell of unfamiliar plants, the kind that seemed to reach out and wrap around you like something alive. The sound of distant animals echoed through the air, but everything was still too still, as if the jungle was holding its breath. He had been walking for hours, his boots sinking into the damp earth with every step, unsure of where he was headed or why he had decided to follow the alien child. It had been a chance encounter, a scream out of nowhere, and then the pleading voice of a creature unlike any he had ever seen. The child had found him in the middle of his workday, sitting alone by his equipment. Out of nowhere she had appeared, her eyes wide with terror. She had grabbed his arm with surprising strength and pulled him from his seat without a word, just pointing toward the jungle before running off, expecting him to follow. He had hesitated. He had never known what to make of these alien beings, but there was something about the fear in her eyes that he could not ignore. Something told him that this was not a moment for doubt, and now here he was deep in a jungle so thick with underbrush that the sky was barely a memory. The child ahead of him, running as fast as her small legs could carry her, her alien form silhouetted against the strange glow of distant plants, their bioluminescence casting eerie shadows on the fire ground. He could hardly keep up with her, but he knew he had no choice. As they moved further into the jungle, the air grew heavier, more suffocating, and the sounds of the creatures surrounding them became louder, more threatening. He had heard stories of these places from the older settlers. They were called Deathworlds, places so harsh and dangerous that even the most seasoned adventurer would hesitate to step foot on them. But here he was chasing after an alien child whose mother was trapped somewhere deeper in the jungle. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. But when he saw the child's eyes pleading with him as she ran ahead of him, something shifted inside him. He felt a pull, a sense of duty, like he couldn't turn back. No matter the risk, he wasn't sure whether it was the human instinct to protect, or just the realization that this was a moment that would define who he was. But he knew that he couldn't let this child face whatever horrors awaited alone. The child stopped abruptly ahead of him, and he barely had time to stop himself from running into her. She turned and pointed into the dense forest ahead, her voice a barely audible whisper, but the urgency in it was clear. The human could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something in the air, something wrong. It was as if the very ground beneath them was alive and watching them. Crouched down beside her, the heavy weight of his pack dragging at his shoulders, his breath coming faster now from the exertion and the strange sense of danger that seemed to press in on him from all sides. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. The alien child didn't speak. Instead, she pointed ahead, her small finger trembling slightly. The human followed her gaze, and that's when he saw it, the glint of metal reflecting the faint light from above, as if someone had placed a trap and then forgotten about it. There was no mistaking what it was, a snare designed to catch something large, something powerful and deadly. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what this meant. The child's mother was somewhere near the trap, injured or worse. The child tugged at his arm with renewed urgency, her large alien eyes pleading with him to hurry. He nodded once, his mind racing through every survival skill he had ever learned. He knew he had to move quickly. He could hear something in the distance, the unmistakable sounds of movement, creatures, perhaps. Or worse, the hunters who would have set this trap. The child was already moving again, her small feet pounding on the earth as she rushed toward the snare, and the human followed suit. Without a second thought, the jungle seemed to close in on them. As they approached the trap, the air thick with tension, and every step they took felt like it could be their last. He could feel the weight of the child's fear pressing down on him, and it made him move faster. He didn't know how long they had before the hunters would arrive, or what they would do to them if they caught them, but he wasn't about to find out. As they neared the trap, the human's mind was racing. He had to get the alien mother out of there quickly, but he didn't know if he had the skills or the tools to do it. He had always been a survivalist, a person who was good in the wild. But this was something else entirely. This was life and death, and he was out of his depth. The child stopped at the edge of the snare, and the human crouched beside her, his breath quick in his chest. His eyes scanned the area for any signs of movement or danger, but all he could hear was the rustling of the trees above and the thudding of his own heart. The child's eyes locked onto his, and he saw something there, a silent plea, something that told him this was more than just a rescue. This was more than saving one life. This was about something greater, something that could change everything about the way humanity and the alien races saw one another. He could feel it now deep in his bones. He wasn't just helping an alien child or rescuing a trapped mother. He was standing at the edge of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could imagine. The snare was only a few feet away now. He could see the alien mother's limp form caught in the trapped blood, staining her skin and the ground around her. But as he reached out to help, he realized one terrifying thing. They weren't alone anymore. You said, no, right? Part 2, and Part 2 will be minimum 800 words more without dots and small lines, right in full. Flowchat GPT said, Part 2. The journey begins. The human's hand hovered over the alien mother's body, but just before he could touch her, he felt it a shift. In the air, a pressure that settled around them like a storm was about to break. He froze, his fingers trembling slightly as he slowly looked around the dense jungle, every sense on high alert. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. Something was coming, and they had no time to waste. The child seemed to sense it too, her small frame trembling as she clutched his sleeve and pulled him toward the edge of the trap. We have to go now, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Without a word, the human nodded, and they both started to move away from the snare, keeping low and fast. He could hear the rustling of leaves behind them, and it wasn't just animals. It was the unmistakable sound of something else hunting them. They had to get out of there. Human's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the thick underbrush. The child moving quickly ahead of him. He knew they couldn't stay here too long. He had to think fast. Had been trained for situations like this, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the raw terror of being hunted by creatures who knew the jungle better than he ever could. Still, he didn't hesitate. He had one goal now: to protect the alien child and get them both out of the jungle alive. The path they were on was narrow, with vines that seemed to reach out and snag at their clothes, as if trying to pull them back into the jungle's heart. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, keeping his eyes on the child ahead of him, who seemed to know where she was going despite the chaos of the world around them. She moved with a speed and grace that was almost unnatural for a creature so small. Her alien form was lithe and agile. Something about her reminded him of an animal with instincts honed to survive in a harsh world. As they pushed forward, the jungle seemed to close in around them, the trees and vines growing more dense with each step. The air grew hotter, more suffocating, and the ground underfoot became soft and treacherous with mud that threatened to pull them down at every turn. It was like walking through a living thing, a creature that was always shifting, always moving. The human's mind raced as he tried to stay focused on the child ahead of him. His thoughts kept circling back to the alien mother, who was still trapped. He knew they couldn't leave her behind, but he didn't know how to get her out of there. Without drawing more attention, he had no idea what kind of enemies they were up against, or how much time they had before the hunters found them. But he did know one thing: they had to keep moving. It wasn't long before the first sound of pursuit reached his ears, the unmistakable noise of something large crashing through the underbrush, growing louder with each passing second. The child was already running faster, her feet barely touching the ground as she darted between trees and vines, her alien speed putting the human to shame. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself harder, forcing his legs to move faster, even though the strain on his body was starting to take its toll. His pack was heavy and his muscles burned, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The sound of pursuit grew louder and louder until it felt like the jungle itself was alive with danger. He had to think fast. He had to find a way to get them both out of here before whatever was following them caught up. He looked around, desperately searching for some sort of escape, a path, a way out. But the jungle was a maze, its dense foliage offering no clear way forward. His mind raced through his survival training, every instinct telling him to move faster to keep the child safe, but the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. They were outmatched, they were outgunned, and yet they couldn't stop. Child was ahead of him now, and he could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Something he hadn't seen before, a determination, a will to survive that was almost human. It made him push harder, not just for himself, but for her as well. Reached a small clearing, and for a moment it seemed like they were safe, but then the human heard a low growl from behind them. He spun around just in time to see the first of the hunters emerging from the shadows. They were tall and lean, their eyes glowing in the dark with an unnatural light. Their bodies were covered in armor that seemed to be made from the very jungle itself, vines and leaves wrapping around them like a second skin. Their movements were fluid, almost graceful, but there was no mistaking the deadly intent in their eyes. The human's breath caught in his throat as the first of the hunters raised its weapon, a long spear that shimmered with energy. The child was already moving again, darting into the trees, and the human had no choice but to follow. The hunter's spear sliced through the air with terrifying speed, but the human was already running, leaping over the fallen branches and dodging the vines that seemed to reach out and grab at him. The child was fast, but the hunters were faster, and they were relentless. The jungle seemed to close in around them again as they ran, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. The hunters were gaining, and the human knew they couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a plan. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device. It was an old signal jammer, something he had picked up during his time in the military. It wasn't much, but it might buy them a little time. He pressed the button and a hum filled the air for a brief moment. Before everything went quiet, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. The hunters' steps faltering for a moment as their communication systems were disrupted. Wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a few precious seconds to get further away from the hunters. He grabbed the child's hand and pulled her forward again, the fear in her eyes replaced by a glimmer of hope. But the jungle wasn't done with them yet. Ground beneath them began to shake, the trees creaking as something large began to move through the jungle, the sound of its footsteps sending vibrations through the earth. The human's heart raced as he looked up and saw a massive figure looming over them, a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was as if the jungle itself had come to life, and now it was hunting them. The human didn't know if they could outrun this new threat, but he knew one thing for sure: they had to keep moving or they wouldn't survive. You said, "No, right, part 3, and part 3 will be minimum 800 words more unique, without dots, do not write." In small lines, ChatGPT said, Part 3, The Alien Mother's Captivity. Human's chest heaved with each breath as he sprinted through the jungle, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for the child ahead who had somehow become his only guide. Through this twisted world, the thick foliage around them seemed to close in with every step, the vines and leaves wrapping around their legs like something alive trying to pull them into the earth. He could hear the pounding footsteps of the hunters behind them growing louder, but it was the strange sound ahead that made him stop. Child had stopped too, her body rigid, her ears twitching, as if she were listening to something far away. The human followed her gaze and saw the outline of a large tree ahead, one that was different from the others, its bark smooth and dark as if it had been carved by some ancient hand, and beneath it was the shape of something else, something he had been dreading to see, the alien mother. She was trapped in a snare of thick vines, her body slumped and motionless. Her limbs were bound tightly by the intricate web of plant life, the once vibrant skin now pale and torn from the strain of being held in place for so long. The human's heart clenched at the sight of her, the realization of how close they were to death finally hitting him. She had been here too long too. Vulnerable for too long, and now he was here standing at the edge of her suffering, unsure if he could do anything to help the child. Moved toward her quickly, her tiny hands trembling as she reached for her mother's face. The alien mother's eyes flickered slightly as the child whispered something too soft for the human to hear, but the child didn't wait for a response instead. She turned to the human, and in her eyes he saw it again, the same fear that had drawn him into this mess in the first place. "We have to help her," the child said, her voice trembling with emotion. The human could see the desperation in her face. She wasn't asking him, she was telling him there was no other choice. He knelt beside the alien mother, his fingers brushing against the vines that held her in place. They were thick and strong, each one, a twisted knot of plant life that seemed to pulse with some strange energy. The human had seen plants before on Earth, but nothing like this. These vines seemed to have a life of their own, a mind of their own. He could feel the pulse of energy, moving through them like they were connected to something deeper, a part of the jungle itself. He pulled at the vines gently, trying not to cause more harm to the alien mother, but they didn't give way. Instead, they tightened as if the jungle was alive and fighting back. He cursed under his breath and looked back at the child, whose eyes were wide with fear. "There's no time," she said in a whisper, her voice tight with panic. "They're coming." The human didn't need to ask who she meant. He could hear the sound of something moving through the jungle, faster now, much faster than before. The hunters were close. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder at the vines, but they didn't budge. The alien mother's body twitched slightly in the trap, but she didn't speak. The human could only imagine what kind of pain she was in, trapped like this, in the middle of this death world, with no way out. But they had to act fast. The child tugged at his arm, urging him to hurry, and without another thought, the human grabbed his knife from his belt and started slicing through the vines. With each stroke, he could feel the tension building around them as the jungle seemed to react to his presence, like it was aware of what he was doing. He had never felt anything like this before, not even when he had been on Earth dealing with hostile environments. These vines weren't just plants, they were part of something much larger. He managed to cut through a few of the vines, but the effort was slow, and the hunters were getting closer. He could hear their voices now, a low growl mixed with something else, something like a warning. As he worked faster, he glanced over at the child, her small face stricken with worry, but also determination. She wasn't going to leave her mother behind, and neither was he. The vines suddenly shifted, as if responding to his thoughts. They tightened around the alien mother's body, and the human could hear her weak gasp as the snare pulled at her flesh. He cursed again, his hands moving faster than before, as he hacked at the vines, desperately trying to free her. The child watched him, her eyes wide with terror. But she didn't speak. Instead, she knelt beside her mother, trying to offer what little comfort she could. Then it happened. The vines loosened. The human didn't know how or why, but the moment he cut through the last of the thick strands, the snare released its grip on the alien mother, and she fell into his arms. Her body was limp and unresponsive, but she was free. The human's heart raced as he pulled her into his arms, her weight pressing down on him as he stood up and looked around desperately. The child was already moving ahead, her speed and agility more than a match for anything in the jungle. "We need to go now," child said, her voice firm and focused. Her eyes darted back to the human, as if she knew how much danger they were still in, and how much longer they had to escape. The human didn't argue. He grabbed the alien mother and followed the child through the dense jungle, his mind racing as he moved. His legs ached, his body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that. The hunters were close, and there was no way they would escape if they didn't keep moving. He pushed through the thick brush, his heart pounding as the sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. The jungle seemed to close in around them again, the vines and branches twisting in unnatural ways, trying to slow their progress. But the human wasn't stopping. He couldn't stop, not when they were so close, not when he knew what was at stake as they moved through the jungle. The human felt the weight of the alien mother's body in his arms. He had never felt anything like it. She was so different from anything he had ever held. The warmth of her body, both alien and familiar at the same time. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer, but he didn't know where they could go. The child led them through the jungle, weaving between trees and plants that seemed to pulse with life around them. Her movements were so fast, so precise. It was as if she knew exactly where to go. The Human followed closely behind his thoughts, racing with every step. What had he gotten himself into? What was he protecting now, and what dangers were ahead? He didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: they weren't out of danger yet. And if they didn't keep moving, they might never make it out of this jungle alive. You said, no, right? Part 4, and Part 4 will be minimum 800 words more unique without dots and small lines. ChatGPT said Part 4, the savage hunters arrive. The dense jungle pressed in on them like a living thing, every step deeper into the thicket, drawing them closer to something they couldn't escape. The human's legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't afford to slow down, not now, when the alien mother's life hung in the balance. He clutched her close in his arms, trying to keep her weight steady as he followed the child through the thick undergrowth. Their path was winding and treacherous, and the trees seemed to reach out with their gnarled branches as if trying to keep them from escaping. The child moved with remarkable speed, darting between vines and trees with an agility that was impossible to match. Her small form was almost a blur as she navigated the jungle with a precision that seemed beyond human capability. The human could barely keep up his breath, coming in short gasps as he forced himself to keep going despite the weight of the alien mother's limp body pressing down on him. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. This jungle was alive, and it was hunting them. The trees, the vines, the very earth beneath their feet were all part of something greater, something dark and alive. He had no idea how much time had passed since they had freed the alien mother, but it felt like the jungle was swallowing them whole. The air had become thicker, the humidity unbearable, and the jungle seemed to close in around them. He had heard stories about the Deathworlds from the settlers who had made it through, but none of those stories had prepared him for the raw violence of the jungle. He had known the jungle would be dangerous, but he hadn't expected it to feel like this suddenly. The child stopped ahead of him, her small frame tense and alert. The human caught up to her, his hand still gripping the alien mother tightly as he looked around, but saw nothing. Child's ears twitched, and she turned back to the human, her eyes wide with fear. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick air. "The hunters." The human's heart skipped a beat. He knew they didn't have much time. They were too close to the edge of the jungle to go back, but they weren't far enough away to outrun their pursuers. He could hear something, now faint at first but growing louder, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crashing through the jungle toward them. His mind raced as he looked for a place to hide or a way to escape, but there was nowhere to go. They were too exposed out in the open, like this. The only option was to keep moving, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could go on with the alien mother in his arms. He had no idea how long she would last, how much longer he could keep carrying her through the jungle. But he couldn't afford to stop now, not with the hunters closing in. He turned to the child and saw the look of determination in her eyes. She wasn't afraid, she was focused. She was ready to fight if she had to, and the human found himself wondering just who these aliens were and what they were capable of. Without a word, the child started moving again, leading the way through the jungle with the human following close behind. His every muscle screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain, moving as fast as he could. He could feel the eyes of the hunters on them now, even though he couldn't see them. The jungle had become a maze of shifting paths, and the trees seemed to close in on them with every step. The child led them to a small clearing, surrounded by thick trees and vines. She stopped just at the edge and turned back to the human. "This is it," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to fight now." The human barely had time to react before the hunters emerged from the jungle. The first one appeared from the trees like a shadow, its movements swift and deadly. It was tall and lean, with dark eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its body was covered in armor that seemed to be woven from the very jungle itself, vines and leaves clinging to its skin like armor. The others followed shortly after, moving with the same eerie grace, each one wielding a weapon that looked like a cross between a spear and fire and a whip. The human's heart raced as he dropped to a crouch, instinctively readying himself for a fight. But the child didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her small frame seeming to grow with determination as she stood tall in front of the alien mother. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice carrying a weight that was beyond her years. Hunters paused, their eyes flicking between the human and the child as if trying to gauge whether they were a threat or not. The child's gaze locked with the leader of the hunters, and the human saw something shift in the air. It was like a quiet understanding, a moment of silent communication that only the child and the hunters shared. Then, without warning, the leader of the hunters lunged forward, its weapon slashing through the air with a speed that was almost too fast for the human to follow. He barely had time to react as the child darted forward, her small hands reaching out and deflecting the blow with a movement that was almost too fast for him to comprehend. The human's eyes widened in disbelief as the child effortlessly stopped the hunter's weapon, her speed and precision unlike anything he had ever seen before. The child was powerful, not in the way that strength alone could describe, but in a way that was pure raw instinct, a force of nature that made the human realize how far they had come and how little he understood. The hunter stepped back, looking momentarily taken aback by the child's power, but it didn't take long for the others to join in. They moved with a coordinated precision, like a pack of predators working together to bring down their prey. The human knew he had no time to waste. He couldn't let the child face these creatures alone, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. He grabbed his knife and rushed forward, his body moving on instinct as he threw himself into the fray. The first hunter lunged at him, but he sidestepped the attack with a swift move and slashed his knife across its arm. The hunter hissed in pain but didn't retreat, instead came at him again, its weapon flashing in the moonlight. The human blocked the next attack with his knife, but the force of the blow sent him stumbling back. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to stop. He had to protect the child. He had to protect them both. Child moved like a blur beside him, her small form darting between the hunters and striking with precision. She wasn't just fighting to survive, she was fighting to protect her mother, and the human could see it in every movement. The hunters weren't prepared for this. They weren't prepared for a fight like this. The human's pulse quickened as he realized the odds were shifting. The child's strength was beyond anything he had expected, and he knew they had a chance, a small chance, but a chance nonetheless. He fought with everything he had, pushing forward with his every step as the battle raged around them. The hunters were relentless, but so were they. The jungle had become their battleground, the trees swaying and shifting above them like silent witnesses to a fight. They would never forget the unexpected rescue. The human's muscles were aching, his breath ragged as he faced down the savage hunters. The battle was fierce and brutal, but something inside him had shifted. He had started this journey thinking he was just a man caught in an alien world, but now he was something more. He had become a protector, someone who would fight to the last breath to keep those who depended on him alive and safe. The child beside him moved with deadly precision, her small form darting between the hunters, her movements fluid and almost inhuman. Her strength was astounding as she blocked, losing because in that moment he realized something. He had to believe in them. He had to believe they could win then. Just as the human thought the fight was about to turn in the hunter's favor, something happened. The ground shook beneath them, and the jungle seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The air became thick with an unfamiliar energy, and a sound like the roar of a mighty beast echoed through the trees. The human's heart skipped a beat as he looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, but everything around him was chaos. The hunters were still advancing, but their movements had become more erratic, almost as if they were confused. And then he saw it. From the shadows of the jungle came something massive, something so enormous that it dwarfed the hunters. It was a creature unlike anything the human had ever seen, its body covered in dark armored scales that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The creature moved with purpose, its eyes glowing with an inner light. As it charged forward with incredible speed, the hunters seemed to recognize the creature immediately, and they faltered, their confidence suddenly wavering as they stopped their attack. The human stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what was happening. He had no idea what this new arrival was or why it had come, but there was no mistaking the power it exuded. The creature was a force of nature, a beast that seemed to come straight out of the jungle itself. Its presence was enough to stop the hunters. In their tracks, without warning, the creature let out a mighty roar, and the jungle seemed to respond. The trees swayed as if bowing to its power, the vines retracting, as if they feared this being. Hunters looked at each other uncertainly, but before they could act, the creature lunged forward, its massive claws tearing through the air with terrifying precision. The human watched in awe as the creature made quick work of the hunters, its movements swift and graceful despite its size. The battle shifted in an instant, and the hunters who had once seemed so invincible were now scrambling for survival. Child stood beside the human, her eyes wide with shock and wonder as the creature tore through the jungle with an unstoppable force. It was like watching nature itself fight back against the invaders. The human didn't know what to think. He had no idea who or what this creature was, but he knew one thing for certain: it had come to help them. Remaining hunters were quickly overwhelmed by the creature's ferocity, and in just moments, the battle was over. The jungle fell silent once more, but the human couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play here. Something bigger than just the fight for survival. The creature stood tall before them, its glowing eyes locked onto the human and the child as if assessing them. Then, slowly, the creature lowered its head in what seemed like a gesture of respect, its massive form towering over them as it stepped back slightly, allowing the human and child to breathe. For the first time in what felt like hours, the human didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if this creature was an ally or just another force of the jungle, but in that moment he didn't care. They had survived, and that was all that mattered. The alien mother in his arms stirred slightly, and he looked down to see her eyes flickering open. She was weak but alive, and that was all he could ask for. "Thank you," the child said, her voice barely a whisper, but the gratitude was clear in her eyes. The creature didn't respond, it simply stood there, watching them with an intensity that made the human feel as if they were being judged. He felt a strange sense of awe and fear at the same time. As if this creature was more than just a beast, it was a guardian of the jungle, a protector of this alien world. Child reached out and placed a hand on the alien mother's forehead, as if checking to see if she was truly awake. The alien mother's eyes fluttered open, and she let out a soft sound as she struggled to sit up. The human moved to help her, but the child was already there, supporting her mother with a tenderness that was unexpected given the chaos they had just survived. "Are we safe now?" the human asked the child, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Child nodded slowly, still looking at the creature who had saved them. "For now," she said, her voice steady, but there was an underlying fear that remained. "But the jungle is not always kind, and the hunters will return." The human didn't know what to say. He had no experience with this kind of world, these kinds of creatures, but one thing was clear: the jungle was alive, and it wasn't done with them yet. The creature that had saved them wasn't some simple ally, it was part of something much bigger, and he was beginning to realize just how little he knew about the world he had stepped into. The creature turned its gaze to the jungle, once more, its eyes scanning the trees as if sensing something just beyond their sight, and the human knew they weren't done yet. There were more dangers out there, more forces at play than they could comprehend. But for the first time since the child had pulled him into this world, he felt like they might have a chance to survive. He turned his attention back to the child and the alien mother, who was now sitting up, her strength returning slowly but surely. He knew the journey wasn't over. He knew there was much more to come, but in that moment, he allowed himself a small breath of relief. They had survived, and maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever was next together, facing the truth. The jungle around them was eerily quiet, now the chaos of the battle fading into the background as the human and the child took a moment to catch their breath. The alien mother was slowly recovering her breathing, steady but still labored. She had been through so much, and yet there was a fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished. She was stronger than she looked, and in the silent exchange between her and the child, The human could see a bond that was deeper than anything he could comprehend. He sat down on a large rock, his body still trembling from the fight, his mind racing with questions about everything that had happened. He had expected the jungle to be a dangerous place, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer brutality of what lay hidden within it. But more than that, he hadn't expected the involvement of the creatures, the hunters, or even the mysterious guardian that had come to their rescue. He had learned so much in such a short time, and the more he learned, the more confused he became. The creature that had saved them was unlike anything he had ever seen. It had been powerful enough to turn the tide of the battle in an instant. But there was something more to it, something ancient and primal, that seemed to resonate with the jungle itself. The human knew there was a deeper connection between the creature and the world around them, but he didn't understand it. Not yet. He turned to the child who was kneeling beside her mother, her hand gently brushing the alien mother's hair. She didn't speak, but her actions spoke volumes. Her focus was entirely on her mother as she helped her sit up and regain her strength. The human felt a strange mix of admiration and guilt. He had been here to help them, but it felt like he had barely done anything. He had fought, but it was the child who had led them through this journey. It was the child who had saved her mother. It was the child who had given him a reason to keep going. "We need to move on," the child said, suddenly breaking the silence, her voice firm but quiet, as if she had made a decision that she knew they couldn't delay any longer. The human looked at her, confused for a moment. "What do you mean, move on?" he asked, his voice rough from exhaustion. "Where would we go now after everything that's happened?" Child looked up at him, her eyes filled with an intensity that made him pause. "The hunters aren't the only threat in the jungle," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that sent a chill through the human's spine. "The jungle is alive, and it has its protectors. They've been watching us from the start." He frowned, not understanding what she meant. "What protectors?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" The child turned her gaze toward the dense jungle ahead, her eyes narrowing, as if sensing something lurking just beyond their sight. "The creatures, the jungle, they are all part of something much bigger," she said softly, "and the hunters, they were only a small part of it." The human's heart skipped a beat as he realized what she was saying. The jungle was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and everything in it was connected to something far greater than he could ever understand. He had been a part of something much larger than himself from the moment he had stepped into this world, and he had no idea just how deep it went. The alien mother stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open as she looked at the child, her face filled with both pain and pride. She reached out weakly, and the child took her hand. Immediately, their bond unspoken but clear. The human could see the depth of their connection, and it struck him in that moment just how much he had come to care for them. He had been thrust into this world by chance, but now he couldn't imagine leaving them behind. He had become part of their fight, and their survival had become his own. "We need to go to the heart of the jungle," the child said after a long pause, her voice steady as if she had already made up her mind. "That's where we'll find the answers." The human didn't know what she meant by the heart of the jungle, but the determination in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. They had survived so much already, and yet the journey was far from over. There was something more that needed to be done, something they had to face before this was all over. He could feel the weight of it pressing on him, and for the first time since arriving in this alien world, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of this world now, and he had a responsibility to see it through. He stood up slowly, still feeling the weight of exhaustion in his body, but his mind was clear. He knew they had to keep moving. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't rest for long. The hunters may have been defeated, but the jungle had more dangers waiting for them, and the heart of the jungle was calling to them like a beacon. Child stood up as well, her small frame steady and strong despite the weariness that clung to her. She looked at him and nodded as if she knew exactly what he was thinking, and he followed her lead without hesitation. He turned to the alien mother, who was now sitting up, fully supported by the child, her eyes meeting his. With gratitude, but also something else, something deeper. A silent understanding passed between them, and he knew that they weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something greater than themselves. They began to move again, their path winding through the dense jungle, the trees towering above them as if watching their every move. The air was thick with the sounds of the jungle, the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, the occasional distant growl of a creature unseen. But it was the silence between the human and the child that felt the heaviest. The weight of what was to come hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The jungle felt different now. To the human, it wasn't just a place of danger. It was a living entity with a will of its own. It had its own rhythms, its own rules, and the more he saw, the more he understood that they were merely pawns in a much larger game. The creatures, the protectors of the jungle, were part of a greater balance, and they were all interconnected in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for something much more precious. The child led the way through the jungle, her pace steady and unyielding. The alien mother walked beside her, her strength returning slowly as they moved deeper into the heart of the jungle. The human followed closely behind, his mind still racing with questions and doubts. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they had no choice but to move forward into the unknown. The jungle had shown them its wrath, but it had also shown them its power, and now they had to face what lay at the center of it all. The heart of the jungle awaited them, and whatever secrets it held would change everything. The decision, the jungle had grown even darker the deeper they ventured, its vast expanse stretching endlessly before them. The trees seemed to be closing in on them, as if trying to hold them in place, not allowing them to pass. Its strange hum echoed in the air, like the heartbeat of something ancient, something that had been here long before they had ever arrived. The child led the way with the same quiet determination she had shown from the start, her small form darting between the vines and trees with an ease that was almost otherworldly. The alien mother was walking more steadily now, her strength returning slowly, but surely she had been through so much, and yet there was a calmness about her now, an understanding that whatever had happened, whatever they had faced, was part of something much larger than themselves. The human followed behind them, his every sense on high alert. His mind raced with thoughts of everything they had been through, and everything that was still ahead. There was a part of him that still couldn't believe all of this was happening. He had been an ordinary man thrust into an extraordinary situation. But now it was different. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was part of something greater, and he could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him every step they took. They had come so far, but they weren't out of danger yet. The jungle had shown them its power and its danger, but it had also shown them its mercy. The creatures, the protectors of the jungle, had allowed them to pass, but the human knew that wouldn't last forever. There was something about this place, something primal and ancient that he could sense, but couldn't fully understand. It was like the jungle was alive in ways no one could explain, and whatever lay at the center of it all would change everything. They had been traveling for hours. Now the path ahead winding and treacherous, but the child showed no signs of slowing down. Her eyes were fixed ahead, her gaze unwavering, as if she knew exactly where they were headed. The human couldn't help but admire her strength and her resolve. She was young, but she had already seen more than most people could ever imagine. She had lost so much, and yet she still carried on with a determination that he couldn't quite comprehend. The alien mother walked beside her, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying the weight of everything they had been through. She looked over at the human every now and then, her gaze full of gratitude, but also something else. Something that spoke of a bond that went beyond simple survival. They had been through something together, something that had brought them closer than he had ever expected. They were more than just allies now. They were family in a way that he could not fully explain. As they continued on their path, the human began to feel the presence of something else. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a change in the way the jungle seemed to breathe. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the jungle, the feeling grew stronger. The jungle itself was alive with energy pulsating, with something ancient and powerful, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the heart of it all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached it. The heart of the jungle was unlike anything the human had ever seen. It was a massive clearing surrounded by trees that seemed to glow with a soft bioluminescence. Ground was covered in thick moss that seemed to pulse with life, and at the center of the clearing stood a massive tree. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its roots twisting into the earth like the fingers of a giant reaching deep into the ground. Its branches stretched high into the sky, the leaves shimmering with a strange golden light. This was the heart of the jungle, the source of everything. The energy of the jungle seemed to emanate from this tree, its presence powerful and ancient. The child stopped in the center of the clearing, her eyes wide with awe, and something that seemed like recognition. She stepped forward slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, and the human followed her, keeping a close eye on their surroundings. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that whatever came next would change everything. The alien mother stepped forward as well, her gaze fixed on the tree. She looked at the child and then back at the human, her eyes filled with an understanding that he couldn't quite grasp. She seemed to know what was happening in a way that he didn't, and for a moment, the human felt a pang of fear. He didn't know what this place was or what it was going to do to them, but he knew they couldn't turn back. Now the child turned to him, her face serious, but her eyes full of something that could only be described as hope. "This is where it all begins," she said, her voice steady and filled with a quiet certainty. "The jungle has chosen us, the creatures, the protectors. They have all been waiting for this moment for us to come here." The human frowned, still unsure of what she meant. "Chosen us," he repeated. "What do you mean?" The child's gaze never wavered as she spoke. "The jungle is alive, it has a will of its own, a purpose, and it has chosen us to be part of its future. We are the ones who will protect it. We are the ones who will ensure that balance is kept." The human's heart raced as he tried to process what she was saying. He had always known there was something more to this place, something more to their survival, but he hadn't fully understood what it was until now. The jungle wasn't just a force of nature. It was something greater, something that had a purpose, and that purpose involved him and the child. The alien mother reached out her hand slowly and placed it on the trunk of the massive tree. Her eyes closed as if she were communing with the jungle itself, and the human watched in awe as the tree seemed to respond. The golden light from the leaves shimmered, and the air around them thickened with energy. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and for a moment the human thought he could hear something deep beneath the earth, something ancient and powerful. Awakening then, it stopped. The child turned to the human, her expression softening. "We are ready," she said quietly. "The jungle has accepted us." The human stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But then the alien mother opened her eyes and looked at him with a steady gaze. Her face was calm, but there was a knowing in her eyes, something that told him everything he needed to know. "Join us," she said, her voice low but filled with power. "This is where we begin our true journey. This is where we protect what is sacred." The human took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. The journey had only just begun, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Beginning of everything, the jungle had settled, its restless hum now a soft whisper in the air, its energy palpable. As the human stood at the edge of something far beyond his understanding, the heart of the jungle pulsed with a life of its own, as if the earth beneath his feet was breathing in and out, slowly drawing him into its rhythm. The massive tree at the center of it all seemed to watch them, its branches swaying ever so slightly as if greeting them, acknowledging their presence as something that belonged to this place. The child had stepped forward once more, her small feet barely making a sound. On the soft moss, she stood with a quiet reverence, her gaze fixed on the tree, the golden light shimmering around her. The alien mother stood beside her, now fully recovered, her strength returned as if the jungle itself had healed her. Its power was Unmistakable, its grip on the world stronger than anything he had ever imagined. The human felt a shift within him, a recognition of his place in the grand scheme of things. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had become part of this world. The child turned to face him, her eyes filled with the weight of the decision that was to come. She had been born into this world, but in many ways he was a stranger here. He had no claim to this place, yet the jungle had chosen him the same way it had chosen her, the same way it had chosen the alien mother. He had no idea why. He had no idea what part he was supposed to play. But in this moment, standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable, he knew he was a part of something larger than himself, something that transcended what he had known before. This is where we begin our true journey. The child said, her voice steady and full of purpose. This is where we protect what is sacred. This is where we fight to preserve what was lost. The human looked down at the ground beneath his feet, the soft moss that had taken root in the clearing. He could feel the pulse of the jungle deep in his bones, and as he breathed in the air around him, he realized something. He had been a part of this world since the moment he had stepped foot on its soil. It hadn't just been a chance encounter with an alien child that had brought him here. It had been fate or something more powerful guiding him to this very spot. He had fought with everything he had for their survival, but now the fight was different. It wasn't about battling the hunters or surviving the dangers of the jungle. It was about something greater, something that could reshape the future of not just this world, but many others too. He had been given a purpose whether he understood it or not. And in that moment, he made a choice to follow it, no matter where it led. The alien mother looked at him, her gaze calm and knowing. She had seen the truth long before he had, and now it was his turn to understand. It was as if she had already accepted what was to come, and in her eyes, he saw something more than gratitude. He saw acceptance. He wasn't just a man helping an alien child. He was a protector of this world now. He was part of its heartbeat, just as the child and the alien mother were. The child reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his like a silent promise of what lay ahead. They were bound together by something ancient, something unspoken but understood. She had been chosen by the jungle, and so had he. They were all part of its great cycle now, and together they would ensure that its balance was preserved. Jungle had shown them its power, its fury, but it had also shown them its mercy. Its protectors had fought for them. They had saved them when all seemed lost, and now it was their turn to do the same. They would stand together as guardians of this world, watching over it, protecting it from the forces that would tear it apart. The human felt the weight of the jungle's promise settle over him. Its ancient power was now a part of him too, and he understood what he had to do. He would help protect this world, help protect the creatures who lived within, and stand against anyone who threatened its peace. He was no longer an outsider. He was one of its protectors. Together with the child and the alien mother, he took his first step forward into the unknown. A new journey awaited them, one that would take them far beyond the jungle's borders and into a future that was yet to be written. Jungle was alive. It was more than a place. It was a force, a protector, a living entity that knew the value of life and the cost of destruction. And now it had chosen its guardians. The humans smiled as they began their journey forward. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a stranger lost in an alien world. He was a part of it, a part of something bigger than himself. The journey was just beginning, and together they would face whatever came next. The end.